The city lights flickered across the windshield as Saad drove in silence, his fingers tapping the steering wheel in rhythm with the soft hum of the radio. Beside him, Ion stared out the window, chin resting on his hand, watching the blur of neon and shadows glide past. The tension between them was quiet but unmistakable, like a wire pulled taut beneath a calm surface. They hadn't spoken much since they left the cafe, each lost in a tangle of unspoken thoughts. It had started simply, just two old friends reconnecting after years apart. Saad, freshly returned from studying abroad, had called Ion on a whim. A simple "you free tonight" had led to coffee, laughter, a shared cigarette on a rain-slicked sidewalk, and then this drive with no destination. It wasn't planned, but it felt inevitable. "I miss this," Ion said suddenly, voice low but clear. "Just being with you." Saad glanced at him, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before they returned to the road. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Me too." Ion turned to face him, trying to catch his expression, but Saad kept his gaze forward. "You've changed," Ion added. "But not in a bad way. Just you're quieter now. Heavier." Saad chuckled, though it sounded more like an exhale. "Life does that, I guess." They drove for a while longer until Saad pulled off the main road and into a quiet overlook that opened onto a dark, sprawling valley. The city was just a soft glow in the distance, the stars above faint but steady. Ion stepped out first, leaning on the hood of the car, arms folded. Saad joined him a moment later, their shoulders almost touching, but not quite. "I kept thinking about calling you," Ion said. "But I thought maybe you'd moved on. That maybe we were just a phase." Saad didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Ion, really looked at him for the first time that night. "You weren't a phase," he said, quiet and firm. "You were the only thing that made sense for a long time." The words hung between them like mist. Ion's breath caught slightly, his composure tilting. "Then why didn't you stay?" Saad's jaw tightened. "Because I was scared. Scared of what I felt. Scared of losing control. I thought putting distance would make it easier." "Did it?"
"No."
A silence followed, deeper this time. Not uncomfortable, but charged. When Saad finally reached out, his fingers brushing against Ion's, the contact was hesitant, almost fragile. Ion didn't pull away. The wind whispered through the trees, cool and clean. "I think I'm still scared," Saad admitted. Ion turned to face him fully. "Me too. But maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight." Saad gave a small, grateful nod.
"No."
"Just maybe we don't run from it this time." They stood there together, the tension not gone but softer now, transformed into something uncertain but open. The road ahead was still dark, the future unclear, but for the first time in years, neither of them wanted to drive away. The next city morning lights flickered flickered across the windshield as Saad drove in Ion silence. woke first, his fingers tapping the sheets steering wheel in unfamiliar rhythm beneath him, with the soft the hum of the muted radio. golden light of Beside early him, dawn creeping Ion through stared Saad's out the bedroom window, curtains, chin resting he on lay his there hand, for a few moments, watching the blur listening of to the neon gentle and rhythm shadows of Saad's glide past. breathing beside him. The tension between It them should was have felt quiet surreal, but unmistakable, waking up in the arms like of a someone wire he'd once pulled buried taut beneath so a deep calm in memory. surface. But instead, they hadn't spoken much it felt since like they the left first the cafe, breath after holding it each far lost too in long. a tangle of Saad shifted unspoken slightly, thoughts. Still It had started asleep, simply, just his two arm old friends instinctively tightening reconnecting around after years Ion's apart. waist. Saad, there was a comfort freshly in the touch returned that from neither of studying them abroad, dared to name, had called not Ion yet. on a whim. Ion A turned simple slowly "you free to tonight" face him, had led Saad's to coffee, face was peaceful, laughter, the a usual shared cigarette cigarette on a momentarily rain-slicked erased sidewalk, in sleep. and then this In drive that with quiet, no destination. unguarded moment, It wasn't planned, Ion felt a but pang it of felt tenderness, inevitable. So "I sharp miss it this," almost Ion frightened said him. suddenly. He slipped Voice out of bed low but carefully, clear, not just wanting being to with wake him, and Saad patted glanced barefoot at him, into the kitchen. A flicker the of apartment was something modest, unreadable in his sleek, eyes before they uncluttered, returned to the road. With a quiet masculinity "Yeah," he to said its after a aesthetic. pause. Ion "Me ran a too." hand through his hair. Ion turned and to face opened the him, cupboards, trying to catch eventually his finding expression, coffee but and Saad two kept his mugs. gaze forward. The familiar domesticity of it, Ion the gentle added, clink of but ceramic, not in a bad the way. low hum of Just the kettle you're quieter grounded now. him.
heavier.
Saad emerged a few minutes
Saad
later,
chuckled,
sleep
though it
ruffled
sounded
and quiet.
more like an exhale.
His t-shirt slightly
Life does
wrinkled.
that, I guess.
He leaned against the door
They
frame.
drove for a while
watching
longer
Ayan
until
without
Saad
saying
pulled off
anything.
the main road.
You
and into a
always did
quiet
hate
overlook
mornings.
that opened
Ayan
onto a
teased
dark,
lightly,
sprawling
setting a mug
valley.
down on the table.
The city was just
Saad
a
gave
soft
a tired
glow
smile.
in the distance.
I
The
hate
stars
mornings that
above
remind
faint
me
but
reality
steady.
still exists.
Ayan stepped out
They
first.
sat at the kitchen
leaning
table,
on the hood of the car.
the silence between
arms
them
folded.
now laced with
Saad
something
joined
new.
him a moment later.
Not discomfort.
Their shoulders
but
almost
unspoken
touching,
questions.
but not
Ayan
quite.
stirred his coffee
I kept
slowly,
thinking about calling
not
you,
meeting Saad's
Ayan
eyes.
said.
What happens
but
now?
I thought
He
maybe
asked
you'd moved
finally.
on.
That
Saad
maybe we were
exhaled,
just a phase.
long and low.
Saad
I don't
didn't
know.
answer immediately.
Ayan looked up.
Instead,
You
he looked
always
at
used
Ayan,
to have a plan.
really looked at him for the
That was
first time
before
that
I
night.
knew I could lose
You weren't a
by
phase,
following
he
it.
said. The weight of
Quiet
those
and
words
firm.
settled between them.
You were the only thing
Saad's
that made
voice
sense
didn't
for
tremble,
a long time,
but it held a
the words
vulnerability
hung between
Ayan
them like
rarely
mist.
heard.
Ayan's
years,
breath caught
they had
slightly,
danced around
his
their
composure
feelings,
tilting,
close,
then why
then
didn't you
apart,
stay?
pulled by
Saad's
fear,
jaw tightened,
distance, and
because
the
I
quiet
was scared
ache of expectations
scared of what
they
I
couldn't
felt.
escape, scared
Last
of
night
losing
had
control.
shattered whatever
I
distance
thought putting
they had
distance would
carefully
make it
rebuilt.
easier. Ayan reached
Did it?
across the table.
No.
His
A
fingers
silence
brushing
followed,
against Saad's.
deeper this time.
I'm not asking
Not
for a plan,
uncomfortable,
just
but
honesty.
charged.
I
When
want you.
Saad finally
Saad
reached
said
out,
quietly, his
I've
fingers
always
brushing
wanted
against
you.
Ayan's.
Even when I
The
told
contact
myself
was
I
hesitant,
didn't. Even when
almost
I
fragile.
left. Ayan didn't
Then
pull away.
why does it still
the
feel
wind
like
whispered
we're
through the
hesitating?
trees? Cool
Saad
and
looked
clean.
away.
I
Because
think I'm
part
still
of me
scared,
still believes
Saad
this
admitted.
world isn't
Ayan
made for
turned
people
to
like
face
us.
him fully.
That wanting
Me
this
too.
openly,
But
loving
maybe
you
we don't
openly,
have to figure it
is
all out
inviting
tonight.
a storm we might
Saad
not
gave
be
a
strong
small,
enough to survive.
grateful nod.
No,
Ayan's jaw
just
tightened.
maybe we don't
we're
run from it
stronger
this
than
time.
you think. They stood
There
there
was
together.
silence again.
The tension not
Outside,
gone, but softer
the city
now.
was beginning to wake,
transformed into
the sounds of
something
engines
uncertain
and
but
footsteps
open.
and
The
distant
road
voices
ahead was
building
still
like
dark,
a slow
the
tide.
future unclear.
Ayan stood,
but for the first
and walked
time in
toward
years,
the window.
neither of
arms
them wanted to
folded
drive
across
away.
his chest.
I didn't wait for you, he said without turning. I tried to move on. There were others. Not many. None of them stayed. But I never stopped thinking about you. Not even once. Saad rose and came up beside him. You didn't have to wait. I never deserved that. Maybe not. But I did. And now we're here. Their reflections stood side by side in the glass. Two men shaped by time, silence, and choices made in fear. But beneath that, there was something enduring, unbroken. I want to try, Saad said. But we have to be careful. Careful gets us nowhere. Ayan replied, softer now. What's the point of finding each other again if we're just going to hide? Saad nodded slowly. Then let's not hide. Let's start small. Real. I'm not promising it'll be easy. I'm not asking for easy. Just real. Their eyes met again, something fragile yet fierce blooming between them. No declarations, no cinematic promises, just the tentative rebuilding of trust, brick by brick. As the morning settled into full light, Saad reached out and took Ayan's hand, holding it firmly for the first time in years. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Enough to start. The next morning flickered across the windshield, cautious rhythm. Ayan woke first. Found himself visiting more often. Steering wheel rhythm, growing more familiar. Golden walls of Saad's apartment. Dawn creeping. There were no formal declarations. Chin resting lay there for a few moments, watching the blur moments, the gentle rhythm, shadows slide, breathing beside him. Lingering glance between them was quiet. Occasional brush of waking up in the arms of someone who once buried, yet beneath the surface. But instead, both of them knew that they felt like their first breath after holding it far too long. Saad turned with a hesitant urgency. It had started simply, just two old friends tightening around Ayan's waist. One evening, there was a comfort in the touch that neither of them dared to make. Called Ayan on a whim. Ayan turned slowly. Ayan lingered on the couch. Saad's face was absent-mindedly. The usual Garderoto albums had left on the table. And then this dry, quiet, unguarded moment. It wasn't planned. Ayan felt stories of college inevitable. Trips with friends, family gatherings. Said suddenly. Everything that made up carefully. He had once not wanted to wake you, and then disappeared glanced at him. I almost forgot how the apartment was modest. Readable anxieties before they returned to the photo of the two of them at masculinity, he said after barefoot. Ayan ran a hand through his hair. We looked like we had the world figured out, trying to catch his expression from the kitchen, but Saad kept two cups of tea in familiar domesticity. We were pretending the gentle clink of saran, not in a bad way. The low hum of the kettle handed Ayan a cup and sat beside him. Saad emerged a few minutes later to crowd the space, though it sounded more like an exhale. His shirt slightly settled apart. I guess. He leaned against the door. They drove for a while longer. I missed that version.
off the main road.
Before the
You
silence,
always did hate
before the
distance.
distance.
Ion
Onto a
teased
dark,
lightly.
Sod
Sprawling
hesitated
about
down on
then
the table.
asked.
The city was just
Sod
as
gave a
tired
glow in the
smile.
distance.
The way things
I
happen.
hate
Stars
mornings
above
that
Ion
remind
thought
me
for a
reality
long
still
moment.
exists.
Ion
I
stepped
regret the
outside,
silence.
sat at the kitchen
Leaning
table
on the hood of the
anything
car.
else. The silence
I
between
don't
them
regret
now
what
laced
I
with
felt.
Sod joined him a
I
moment
just
later.
wish
We'd
their
had the courage to
shoulders
say it
almost
back
spoke
then.
questions.
But
Sod
Sod
stirred his
slowly.
coffee
I kept
slowly.
thinking about
Back
calling
then,
you.
meeting
I didn't
Sod's
know
Ion
how to
said.
love you
What
without
happens
these
now?
now.
I thought
He
maybe
asked
you'd moved
finally.
on.
The confession was
Sod,
long,
maybe we were just
too
honest,
long and
and
low.
it stung.
I don't know.
Ion
Stared
answered
Ion
immediately.
looked up.
The
Instead,
steam
you
from
always
Ion
sterling
really
into
looked at
space
him
between
for
the
the
first
first
time
before I
that night.
knew
Still
I
feel
could
that
lose
way.
one of
He
faith.
asked quietly. The weight of
No,
those words
confirmed.
settled between them.
You were the
Looking
only
directly
thing
at
that
me
voice
now.
didn't
For a
tremble,
long
but
time.
sometimes
But
it
it
held
held
the words
vulnerability.
hung between
Ion
them
like
like
smoke
smoke
from a fire that
Ion's
was
breath
already out.
caught
They had
slightly.
danced
Ion
around
said
their
his
composure
composure
tilting and
close.
leaned forward.
Then why didn't you
Then let it
stay?
go.
Hold by
Sod,
fear.
you're not that boy
Distance
anymore.
and
Because
the quiet
neither of us
scare
are.
of expectation.
Scared
You
of
don't
what
have
I
to
felt.
keep
Living in the
escape.
ashes.
Scared
Last
of
night
losing
had
control.
shattered whatever
I
distance
stopped putting
they had
distance.
The door
Carefully
buzzer
easier.
rang. Ion reached across the table.
No.
And
His
jarring
fingers
silence
crashing
followed
against
Sod.
Sod's
Deeper this
tense.
time.
I'm not asking
Ion
for
uncomfortable
plans.
toward the door.
Just
but
honestly.
you expecting
I
someone?
want you.
Sod finally
Sod
shook his
shook
head
his
quietly. His
No.
fingers
I've always
brushing
wanted
against
to.
Ion.
Walked to
Even
the
when I
intercom.
told myself
Was
I
hesitant.
couldn't.
A pause.
Even when I
Almost
left.
fragile.
Then his voice.
Ion didn't
then
pull
hello.
away.
Why does it still
The
feel
wind
like
whispered
we're
hesitantly
crackled through the speaker?
cool
Sod
and
looked
clean.
away.
I
It's
think
me
a part of me
still believes
Sod
Ion
Ion
stiffened.
isn't made for
turned
people
his
like
face
that.
struck like a
That
forgotten
wanting
voice.
this
Openly,
He
but
rose
loving
slowly.
you
Maybe we don't
openly.
have to
Watching
figure it
Sod's
all out.
inviting a
Shoulders
storm,
tense
we
for
might
Sod
not
gave
be
a
strong
I didn't know
enough
you
to
were
survive.
back.
Grateful nod. She said from below.
Ion's
jaw
Can I
tightened.
come up?
Maybe we
don't
don't
run
stronger
over
than
his
his
shoulder.
shoulder. They stood there
Eyes
together,
silence
meeting
again.
The
tension
not
there
was
was
hesitation there.
The city was beginning to wake.
Formed
Something
into
sounds
something
of engines
uncertain
and
without
footsteps
speaking.
and
The
distant
road
voices
ahead was
building
still
on
Ion
slow
folded his
tide.
arms
Future
across his
Ion
chest,
stood
but for the
and
first
looked
time toward the
as
window.
in your ex.
Neither of
Arms
them wanted to
folded
drive
across
away.
chest.
We
I
haven't
didn't
talked
wait
in
for
over a
you,
year,
he said without
I
turning.
have no idea
I
why
tried to
she's
move
here.
on.
There
The
were
elevators,
others, mechanical
not
hum
many.
grew louder. None of them
Then came a
stayed.
knock,
But I
light
never
and
stopped thinking
precise.
about you.
Sod
Not
opened
even
the door.
once. Amna stood
Sod
in the hallway
rose,
and
slightly
came up
drenched
beside
from
him.
the rain.
You didn't
A
have
red
to wait.
scarf clinging
I
to
never
her
deserved
shoulders.
that.
Her
Maybe
eyes
not,
landed on
but I did.
Ion almost
And
immediately.
now we're here. There was a
Their
flash of
reflections
recognition,
stood side by
confusion,
side in the glass.
and something harder
Two
to
men
name.
shaped by
I didn't
time,
know you had company.
silence,
She said,
and choices
stepping
made
inside.
in fear.
Sod
But beneath
offered her
that,
a towel.
there was
avoiding
something
Ion's
enduring,
gaze.
unbroken.
We were just having
I want to
tea.
try,
Sod
she
said.
smiled faintly.
But we have to be
still
careful.
making chai like an old
Careful
uncle.
gets us nowhere.
Ion moved toward
replied,
the kitchen,
giving
softer
them
now.
space.
What's the
But
point
his
of
ears
finding each
stayed
other again?
tuned to
If
every
we're just
word.
going to hide.
I came because I
Sod
needed
nodded
closure.
slowly.
Amna said
Then
softly.
let's not hide.
There were things
Let's
left
start small.
unsaid. And
Real.
I couldn't
I'm
move
not
on without
promising
them.
it'll be easy.
Sod looked
I'm not
genuinely
asking for
conflicted.
easy.
Now might
Just
not
real.
be the best time.
Their eyes met again.
I won't stay long.
Something
she
fragile,
replied.
yet
I
fierce
just needed to
looming
see
between
you.
them.
To understand.
No declarations, no
Ion
cinematic
returned with a
promises,
fresh cup,
just the
placing
tentative
it on the
rebuilding
table
of
for
trust,
her, his
brick by
expression
brick.
neutral.
As the
You don't
morning
have to
settled
pretend
into
I'm
full
not
light,
here.
Sod reached
Amna
out
met his eyes
and took Ion's
surprised
hand,
by his directness.
holding it firmly.
You're
for the
Ion,
first
right?
time in years.
The friend from
It
university.
wasn't everything, but
Ion
it was
gave
something.
A small nod.
Enough to
That's
start.
me.
She looked between them, something shifting in her posture. I always wondered. There was a distance between Sod and me that I couldn't explain back then. Maybe I was just looking in the wrong direction. The room fell into a charged quiet. Sod opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't seem to find the words. Amna stood, the tea untouched. That's all I needed to know. She smiled, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. I hope you both figure it out. Then she was gone, the door clicking softly behind her. Sod sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. Ion sat beside him. Are you okay? He asked gently. I don't know, Sod admitted. That felt like a chapter closing, and I didn't even know it was still open. Ion leaned in, resting his head on Sod's shoulder. Then maybe it's time we start writing a new one. And for once, Sod didn't pull away. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still felt heavy, as if the city hadn't quite shaken off the storm. Sod stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the wet streets below where school children splashed through puddles and traffic resumed its restless rhythm. Behind him, Ion moved about the kitchen, his quiet presence grounding,
like sunlight slipping through after long hours of shadow. Neither had spoken much since Amna's visit the night before. Her parting words had pierced through something delicate, an acknowledgement that neither of them had been ready to say aloud, that the love they were rediscovering now had always been there, in glances and silences, in hesitation and distance. And now, finally, it stood exposed. Ayan walked in, handing Saad a new cup without asking, the scent of cardamom rising between them. You didn't sleep much, he said. I couldn't, Saad admitted, taking the cup. I kept thinking about her. About us. About how long I've been living split down the middle. Ayan leaned against the wall across from him, arms crossed. You don't have to apologize for your past. We all carry pieces of what we've been through. What matters is what we choose now. But that's the thing, Saad said, looking at him. Choosing you now means choosing against everything I've let others believe about me. My family, my work, the version of me that they all think they know. Ayan's expression didn't waver. You don't owe them a lie. You never did. But they're still my family, Saad said quietly. I've spent so much of my life trying not to disappoint them, trying not to draw attention to the parts of me I was told to hide. And where did that get you? The question hung in the air. Saad looked away. Ayan stepped forward, his voice gentler now. I'm not asking you to fight a war, Saad. I'm just asking you not to fight yourself anymore. Saad looked up, and for a moment, something shifted in his eyes, resignation giving way to resolve. Then come with me. Ayan blinked. Where?
Dinner.
My parents' house. Tomorrow night. There was a beat of stunned silence. Are you serious? I can't keep living two lives, Saad said. If this, what we have, is going to mean anything, it has to exist outside these walls too. Ayan hesitated, then nodded slowly. If you're sure, I'll be there. I'm not sure, Saad said honestly. I'm terrified, but I want you there anyway. The next evening arrived too quickly. Ayan stood outside the tall gate of Saad's childhood home, dressed carefully, his palms sweating despite the cool air. The house was large, dignified, like a place where expectations weighed more than affection. He took a deep breath, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and rang the bell. Saad answered almost immediately, his face tight with nerves. You came. You asked, Ayan replied with a small smile. Inside, the atmosphere was formal. Saad's mother greeted him politely, if a little stiffly, and his father offered a nod before returning to the newspaper he'd been pretending to read. The table was set, the food elaborate. Ayan complimented everything he could, careful, respectful, but the tension in the room simmered beneath every word. So, Ayan, Saad's father said after a long pause, setting down his glass. What do you do? I'm a graphic designer, Ayan replied. I work freelance mostly. Digital campaigns, branding, a little animation. Saad's mother offered a tight smile. Creative work. Very modern. There was a silence too long to ignore. Then, with a subtle breath, Saad reached across the table and placed his hand over Ayan's. Not a dramatic gesture, just a quiet, deliberate act of truth. His father froze. His mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I wanted you to meet him properly, Saad said, voice calm. He's not just my friend. He's the person I love. The silence was thunderous. His father's expression darkened, and his mother's hands trembled slightly as she lowered her fork. This isn't a joke, Saad, his father asked slowly.
No, Saad said.
It's not. There was a long, charged moment before his father rose from the table without a word and left the room. Saad didn't flinch. His mother remained seated, staring into her plate, her face unreadable. Ayan shifted slightly, but Saad's hand stayed firm over his. Eventually, his mother spoke, voice quiet. You've always been different, she said. I just didn't think you'd say it out loud. I had to, Saad said, because I'm done pretending. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering, not angry, but wounded. Then I hope you're ready for the consequences. I am. After a moment, she nodded once and stood. There's tea in the kitchen. I need a moment. She walked out slowly, leaving the two of them alone. Ayan turned to Saad, heart pounding. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Saad said. For you. For me. For the version of myself I never allowed to exist outside a locked door. And in that moment, something settled between them. Not ease, not safety, but truth. Hard-won, uncertain, but real. They sat in silence, The future still unknown, but the past finally behind them.